Well, birding and birds changed author Trish O'Kane's life, but as her new book details, they can also help change life on planet Earth. Joining me to discuss it ahead of two local readings this week is Trish O'Kane, environmental educator at the University of Vermont and author of Birding to Change the World. Good morning, Trish.
Good morning.
And we're also joined by Teri Sopp, local attorney and member of the Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings Society, which is hosting one of those readings this week. Good morning, Teri.
Hello, Anne. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you back. So, Trish, I've seen you described as an accidental ornithologist. Can you remind us of how you came to birding in the first place?
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's an honor. And I love Florida.
Oh,
I've spent years going to Ding Darling Refuge in Sanibel. I'm a huge fan of the birds of Florida. Of course, the birds of Florida are now on their way up to Vermont, too, where I live. The accidental ornithologist thing happened because something that Floridians will relate to because of a hurricane, Hurricane Katrina. I was a journalist, an investigative human rights journalist in Latin America for 10 years, in Central America, and then 8 years in Alabama. I worked at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and I did civil rights research for an outfit in Atlanta. And after all that, I moved to New Orleans to teach journalism at Loyola University. The problem is I moved there a month before Hurricane Katrina hit. But before Katrina, birds, zero. I knew nothing about birds. I didn't care about birds. I mean, I liked them. They were okay. But it was all about Homo sapiens, all about human rights, the horrible things we do to each other. But when I went through Katrina in New Orleans and our neighborhood was destroyed, that's when I saw viscerally, I smelled it, the connections between environmental justice and social justice. That there was no separating the two. And then I started watching birds. It was just a lark, no pun intended. I was so distressed and so depressed. I just started noticing what was alive in the city because I moved back to New Orleans to teach that post-Katrina semester, which was really difficult because the city was still in ruins. And
you weren't able to live in your house at that point.
our house had to be bulldozed. It was underwater for 3 weeks because we lived in what was called the bowl below sea level, and the water took a while. The levee collapsed near our house. That was the 17th Street Canal levee. Collapsed like an angel food cake. That's how an engineer described it. And so, yeah, it was completely destroyed. Dozens of our neighbors drowned. And so I moved back into a rented room with a friend in the part of the city that did not flood.
But it was still a traumatized city and one that was reeling from the disaster and everything that had been lost.
Yes. And Floridians know that. I mean, it takes a long time after a hurricane to rebuild and to clean up and all the toxins we use in our lives. And so the water isn't just water, it's full of dangerous and poisonous materials. So yes, it was a ruined city. It was a half dead city, a stinky city. I mean, we referred to the place where we'd lived as the dead zone. And literally when you drove in there, I went in just a couple of times to try to retrieve something, and it was right out of a sci-fi horror movie. But people here have they've seen those scenes too, right?
Sure. And so birding was something that was a vision to you of kind of life in the middle of all of this loss and devastation. And what was it about birds that started to, I mean, people see birds all the time, and then people sometimes become birders.
Yep.
What is it that kind of triggers you or moves you from seeing a bird to like really seeing a bird?
Well, the first morning I moved back to New Orleans after Katrina. So that was in January of 2006 to teach. So I'm in a strange place. I wake up that morning in a friend's house. It's like 6 a.m. and it's silent, right? You're in a city and you don't hear traffic. You don't hear people because most people hadn't come back and 1,400 people had drowned. So I wake up and I'm lying there in bed. And I'm feeling very sad and not hearing the people or the traffic, thinking this is so weird. This is because all these people died. And then all of a sudden I hear this clicking outside in my friend's yard. Remember, this is a new place. I don't know the yard. I don't know anything. And I'm like, what's that? And I open the window And there's this cardinal, this beautiful, bright red bird. And I'm like, oh my God, there's something alive out there. Literally, that's what happened. And I was so grateful because so many of the animals were dead. They drowned. And so the birds, I realized immediately, wow, they can fly. Maybe they flew away. Maybe they survived. And that was it for me. Like anything alive in that city, I was going to cling on to it with everything I had just to get through the day.
Mm.
And so after that cardinal, I went out and got a couple of bird feeders at the hardware store in New Orleans and seed. I hung them on my friend's fence. And every morning I started, before I walked to Loyola to teach, I sat down on her back stoop with a cup of coffee and I watched those little sparrows fighting over the seed. And that got me through the teaching day because a lot of my students, I mean, there were tears every day in class. This was, January, February, March, April. We were coming up on the next hurricane season. Everybody knew that. The levees were still trashed. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And so every day in the classroom, there were tears, right? So I needed something to get through that. And the birds, watching them in the morning for just 20 minutes, half an hour every day, that was my medicine. And that's how I got hooked.
You have since gone on to, you got a PhD at the University of Wisconsin after this experience. And it was there that your interest in birding really kind of expanded to include this whole web of environmental activism and a deeper understanding of how it all is interconnected.
Mhm.
Can you talk to us about, first of all, just kind of what was happening when you moved to Madison, Wisconsin, and why that started to evolve into a larger picture for you?
Sure. Well, after teaching in New Orleans, I really wanted to know a lot more about the environment. Again, my background was in human rights and economics. And so I was 44, and I thought, I really want to be outside all the time watching birds, and I want to understand what happened in New Orleans and what's happening to the planet, because that was the first time it hit me like, oh, something's wrong here. This hurricane was so severe. And the water in the Gulf is so warm. Climate change is real. But I knew nothing about climate change. So I decided to go back. I got the PhD. We moved to Madison, my husband and I, and we move across the street from a beautiful urban park, very similar to Audubon Park in New Orleans. And I took an ornithology class because I, wanted to know more about the birds. And the professor said, find a place, go there every week for 1 hour and watch the birds. And I said, I'm going to go across the street to my park. And I ended up finding 142 species in this city park. And half of them were birds that migrated to Central and South America in the winter. And then they came back to Madison, to that same park, to build their nests. So that turned into part of my PhD in a study. But the organizing part came just from talking to a neighbor who loved the animals. Hetty Jacobson, she's 94. She still lives on the edge of Warner Park. And Hetty told me one day, she said, you're studying ecology. Can you tell me why the city would want to put a sidewalk through the meadow in the park? And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, I can't go to meetings at night anymore. I'm afraid of falling down. And could you go to the neighborhood meeting and find out about this? And I didn't want to do it. I thought, oh, God, I don't want to go to a neighborhood meeting. How boring. And, I'd never been to one before. That was the beginning of a 5-year fight, 150 hours of public meetings, 15,000 words of testimony just from me and my husband. We ended up forming a neighborhood group, and we stopped a city plan to pave parts of that park and destroy woods and wetland. And that group's called Wild Warner, and it still exists today. We started it in 2010. And it's still going strong. And now Warner Park, that park is a major birding hotspot in Madison, Wisconsin.
In part because of the research that you did and finding how many species were coming there and
because
visiting.
People didn't know the birds were there, and they were like, wow, well, we don't want to lose these birds. This is really special. And then I started a children's program based at the university that's still going on, pairing college students with kids and taking them to Warner Park every week to learn about the birds and run around and play together. Now I direct that same program in Vermont, and it's also been replicated at Brown University in Providence. Charleston's interested in replicating it, and I think there's a professor of English in Gainesville who I just spoke with last week who's also interested in using it in an English class, a version of it, not exactly the same. So yeah, that's how it started. A neighbor said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And I thought, well, that doesn't sound like a very good idea. You go to a public meeting, and 5 years later, you're still in the fight. But we won.
Yeah.
We won.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Trish O'Kane. She's the author of Birding to Change the World. She's in town this week for some readings. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. We have a message from Jane on Facebook. She says, as a retiree here in Jax, I just volunteered for the 2025 New Orleans Book Festival, Mardi Gras for the Mind. I did not know who you were until the festival. I was there for your book signing, the presentation, and all the individuals who now are interested in birding. I hope you have watched the residents. Birds are everywhere. They tell us when storms are coming and when the sun comes out. Thank you, Trish O'Kane. What is it about your experience that you think, I mean, this is a memoir, but it is also sort of a guidebook to helping people become more environmentally aware, active, and engaged with their community. What is it about your experience that you think is instructive for other people?
Well, first of all, I want to thank that caller. It was so emotional and such an honor to go back to New Orleans 19 years later and give the book back as a gift to that city, because I love the city so much, and people's spirit and spunk, and of course the birds. So that was an incredible event that she was talking about. Such an honor. I think there's a lot in the book that people can learn from and draw from, and it's pretty common sense stuff, but I didn't know it, right? I mean, I'd worked as a journalist, but I had not worked as a community organizer. The first thing it started with was kindness. I mean, Hetty Jacobson came to us the first morning we had arrived. Here we are, Katrina evacuees in Madison, Wisconsin. I'd never lived in the snow. I'm from Southern California. To me, this is the weirdest place in the universe, 100 inches of snow in the winter, a horror movie, right? And the first morning we wake up after driving for 3 days from Alabama with our 2 dogs and moving trucks, and we get there, wake up the next morning in this strange, weird place, and there's this knock on the door. And there's this German woman standing there like in a bathrobe with this hot pan, and she thrusts it at me and she says, "You have coffee pot?" And I'm like, what? What is this? And she'd baked us an apple coffee cake with apples from the park across the street, she told us.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of our friendship, which is still ongoing. Every time I go to Madison, I go to see Hetty and sit in her backyard, and she serves me something delicious. So it started with her. And because she came over to welcome strangers, we became friends, and she became one of my mentors and teachers, and she knew the animals in the park. Because of her, I ended up in a neighborhood meeting. Because of her, we ended up starting a neighborhood organization. So sometimes these efforts just start with kindness and greeting a stranger or baking something for someone. It doesn't have to start with a big thing. That can be a very big thing. And I think there's a lot of moments of joy in the book, because often people, we're right now, especially, I feel very overwhelmed and like, where do we start and how are we going to save all the things we love? And then reminding myself, it started really small with an act of kindness and becoming friends with people, neighbors. And it was super local. So I think people can take lessons and comfort from that. And we really did save that place.
Yeah.
And now it's cherished by many, many people.
Teri Sopp, I want to ask you, you've invited Trish O'Kane, the Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings Society invited her to be the keynote this year. That's in Amelia Island this weekend. What is it about her writing that is relevant to the people of the Society of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings? And maybe it's worth giving us a little reminder of who she was.
Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings was an author who moved to Florida in the 1920s and lived in a small orange grove. I hope everyone has been to her farm at Cross Creek. She wrote...
which is near Gainesville.
South of Gainesville, yes, in between Gainesville and Hawthorne. And she wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Yearling, among many, many other books, short stories, collections. But she really became involved in the community. She moved, like the two of you, from the University of Wisconsin to Central Florida, bought an orange grove sight unseen, and she and her husband tried to make a go of it at this orange grove, but she found, having majored in English at the University of Wisconsin, she found that writing about the people and the place and the surroundings was really more important to her than actually running an orange grove. And so she has a remarkable sense of place about Central Florida, about the scrub, about the people who live there. And so there's a society called the Rawlings Society.org. Well, that's our website. It's it's dedicated to keeping Marjorie's works at the forefront. It's for lovers of literature. It's for academics. Every year we have an annual meeting. We sponsor writing contests for elementary, middle, and high school. We have speakers, a panel of speakers, academics, historians. We always go on a boat tour. And this year, Trish is our keynote speaker. I've known Trish for since 2005. I met her right after Katrina when she spoke at the Amelia Island Book Festival, sorry. And I thought, after this book came out and I read it, that she would just be perfect because of the connection with the soul and the environment, which Marjorie often drew from in her work.
Yeah. And so this event is obviously for people who love books, but it is a way to connect people to kind of thinking about activism perhaps in a different way, and maybe in a way that's less maybe that's smaller. There is, though, I think a sense of, diminishment that people feel when they're looking at such a big issue, things like, climate change, or I've seen you kind of call it climate chaos as
Yes.
opposed to climate change. You think that starting small, though, is the way to begin effective engagement like that?
I do. I don't think it's the only way. We need systemic change. But if you think, I'm a big student and fan of the civil rights movement. I lived in Montgomery, Alabama, 8 years. I worked at Southern Poverty Law Center. I met my husband there. And living there and going to work every day next to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, Dr. Martin Luther King's little church, I mean, you realize movements start in a place. They don't start in the ether. They're not abstract. And they start with one or two or a few people saying, no, this is not okay. Like people are starting to stand up right now. Law firms, even universities starting to organize and saying no to some of the executive orders. So it starts with someone and it starts in a place. And so, yes, I believe we all can do a lot from where we're standing, and that the earth, and I love Cross Creek. I'm just finishing it. Marjorie Rawlings' work, that the sense of the land giving you strength and the soil you stand on and the waters, feeding your soul. So we all need those connections right now and that strength to do what we're going to have to do.
So Trish is speaking at mine.
Tonight, Trish is speaking at Happy Medium
Happy
Books
Medium.
and Cafe. You can call the bookstore. It's over in the Park and King neighborhood. It's a wonderful, small, woman-owned bookstore. We love it very much, and their website will tell you about it. I think there's still some spaces available. I know the spaces, it's free, of course, but you had to make a reservation, and I know that it's filling up quite fast. But Happy Medium Books is hosting Trish tonight, and they have her book for sale there also.
And if people are interested in participating this weekend in Amelia Island?
The rawlingssociety.org, you can click on the conferences and events button, and it will tell you a little bit about that. The conference, I believe, is still open for on-site registration. I think the boat tour might be as well, but I know the banquet where Trish is speaking is sold out.
Oh, well, I guess you can catch her tonight if you can catch her at all. But it is an incredibly deeply researched book. It is a beautiful memoir and a really great instruction manual for participating in community. So thank you for being here, Trish. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So wonderful to be in Florida. Birder paradise.
That's right. Teri Sopp, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ann. It's great to be here.
All right.